Hey, Mark. Hey, welcome to class number 7 of our 12. Glad you made it tonight. Hey, I wanted to say a special thank you for those of you that sent me a note about what apologetics has meant to you, because I put the list together, and last Tuesday night, I had a chance to talk to the elder board here at the church and the pastors, and they were really impressed with what you're getting out of the class. So thanks. I'm glad you're treating it seriously and enjoying it and gaining some confidence as you go out and spread the truth of Christianity. So that's good news. Daylight savings time coming up. Okay, that's good news, huh? Nancy Michelle did last week's goodies, and we got Rhonda and Sherry are sitting over here, and we want to thank them for all the stuff that they put over there. So thank you guys very much. Appreciate it. We've got 20 people coming to our luncheon this Saturday, so it's going to be at Cocina, where we've had it before, and 11:30. And if you're still planning on coming, you haven't let us know, could you let us know ahead of time, because they set up a number of chairs and tables and all that kind of stuff for us. So when you go into Cocina, if you haven't been in our group before, you hang a left, and they've got a special room off to the side, so we don't have to sit with riffraff. Yeah, they don't have to sit with us. Yeah. So anyway, I hope you can come. We got about 20 people right now, so that's good news. Good thing. Tracy's been part of our class for a long time, and you've already heard he has some really good things to say. He's been involved with apologetics. He speaks in different classes, and so he went up to a conference, and I asked him to let us know what was going on up there. So I'll turn it over to Tracy. Got the mic if you need it. Yeah.
Since I kind of need one hand for my notebook, so this was sponsored by Reasons to Believe. I know many of you may have heard of Hugh Ross and his organization. So Reasons to Believe put this together. It's called the AMP conference. This was the 4th year that it took place, and AMP stands for Apologetics Mission Partnership, and it equips believers to be able to defend their faith as is our mission in this class. So it was up at Christ Church of the Valley in San Dimas, started on Friday night and ran through mid-afternoon on Saturday. And there were a total of 10 different speakers. Unfortunately, because of traffic, I was unable to catch the first 2 speakers. Joe Vitale spoke about the apologetics of the apostles. We tend to think of apologetics as a modern day kind of thing, but in reality, even the early church was practicing the same principles of apologetics, and she had spoken about that. J.P. Moreland, I really would have liked to have seen his talk. I got there just as he was wrapping up. Can we actually know that Christianity's central claims are true? So it gets into what's called epistemology, fancy way of saying, how do we know stuff? Now, these lectures were all videotaped, and I think they'll make them available over the next several months online. I'm not sure if they're only going to be available for the folks that attended, or if they're going to be posted for everyone. I'll let you know if you're interested. The next speaker that evening was Hugh Ross. And Hugh Ross is an astronomer and also the president and founder of Reasons to Believe. And Hugh is kind of the fun numbers guy. They don't make any kind of apologies for the fact that they are old Earth creationists. And personally, I don't believe it's a salvation issue, but they believe that the physical evidence points toward an old universe. And his personal stance is that if the universe was really young but created with the appearance of age, then that sounds like it implies that God is deceiving us. And he doesn't believe that God has a deceptive nature. So that's his rationale for believing that what we appear to see is the way it really is. And he gave a lot of fun facts and figures, kind of based on a book he recently wrote called Why the Universe is the Way It Is. And he talked about a conversation he had with a person on a plane who was asking all sorts of questions. And as he answered these questions, he said, by the way, here's a copy of my book. And he went down the list, and basically every question he had asked, like, why is the universe the size that it is? Hundreds of years ago, it was believed that, the universe is so small. They didn't realize just the scale of it. If God is so powerful, why couldn't he create something bigger than this? Now, today, the question is being asked, why does the universe have to be so big if we're the only ones in it that can appreciate it? And so he talked about that. Why is the universe the age that it is? For example, if the universe was any younger, it would be more contracted. All the stars, galaxies would be closer together, and it would be more difficult to observe it and to see what's actually out there. Whereas if it were any older, we'd be too far away to see all the way back to the beginning of it with our most powerful telescopes. Talked about why we are where we are in the galaxy. Again, if we were any closer to the center of the galaxy, we would it'd be too much radiation to support life. And things like that. So I highly recommend picking up some of Hugh's material if you're interested in any sort of cosmology. That's Why the Universe is the Way It Is. I've started going through that book. It's very, very good. Tom Holliday is the senior teaching pastor at Saddleback Church. And rather than speaking to the apologetic aspect, one of the purposes of this whole conference is to build confidence. And so his talk was based on how God uses our weaknesses in our witness. Because oftentimes we feel like, oh my gosh, I cannot remember all those facts and figures. I can't stand up to an argument of someone who has studied all the science and evolution and all the counter arguments for years and years. And his point is, we don't have to worry about that. We just allow God to work through us in whatever capacity we have. He quoted the example of Gideon and said, when God wants to work through us, first thing he does is reduce our resources. He makes us dependent upon him. And he magnifies our need. And from that point, using the illustration of the loaves and fishes, and when someone trusts God with what little they have, then he can use that little bit and magnify it for his own glory. And so we should never be concerned about, I'm not good enough, I'm not articulate enough, I don't know enough. Doesn't matter. Just get out there and engage. The fact that you're engaging someone is by far the most important aspect of the whole concept of apologetics. And I'll touch upon that again a little later. Next speaker is Michael Gillen. And he has, earned the equivalent of 3 PhDs. Also, he was a science correspondent for ABC News, the host of Where Did It Come From on the History Channel. And he was talking about the nature of science, that science is in the business of probing, not proving. You can't really prove some of the most important philosophical concepts with science. You can you can demonstrate, you can say we have strong evidence for, but he pointed out that other than the field of mathematics, you can't really prove anything. For example, I cannot prove that I'm not just a brain in a jar somewhere and all of you are figments of my imagination. I don't act like that's the case, but I can't prove it. He quoted Einstein, who said, no amount of evidence can prove me right, but the smallest shred of evidence can prove me wrong. So an interesting take on that. So another quote, he said, people try to prove things that are hard to believe, but they believe things that are hard to prove. We see that every day when we talk to folks, don't we? So what drove him into this field and investigating the truth of Christianity was a simple question: how did this all come to be? And as he started investigating, he realized all the problems that would be encountered if God didn't exist, and ultimately led him to the conclusion that, wow, this all agrees with what the Bible says. All of the science, all the observations, and led him to faith. So he's got a really good book. Unfortunately, he was sold out, called Amazing Truths, How the Bible and Science Agree. So that's on my reading list now. He talked about an objection he gets sometimes where folks say, well, how do we know that things don't work differently somewhere else in the universe? He talked about relativity and how as things approach the speed of light, now we see distortions in the length that things are measured and the time that things are measured. So things become relative. Well, how do you know everything works the same? Well, he said the descriptors of the universe may be relative. In other words, how long something is, how much something weighs, or how much time has gone by. But the laws that govern those things are not. Over and over and over, all of our observations about the universe say that the way things work here, they work the same there and there and there and everywhere we can see. We are living in a universe that is consistent in its properties, made by a God who is consistent as well. And he had a little treasure box and said, your mind is a lot like a treasure box. And that is, it's filled with, we want to fill it up with truth. Truth is like gold. And we want to make sure that what we put in it is of value, that we want to avoid fool's gold, where we want to test everything and hold on to what is good, as the scripture tells us. Fuz Rana, this was an interesting talk. So Fuz is the president of Research and Apologetics, and his background is in the biological sciences. And his talk was about what is called transhumanism. And that is how humanity is using technology to improve itself, to increase lifespan, to increase our ability to sense things. Everything from simple, relatively simple cochlear implants to, he showed a video where a Welsh violinist who had been in a tragic auto accident and left essentially a paraplegic, well, not only paraplegic, almost a vegetable, really. A neuroscientist had developed this system of brain implants that could read her thoughts, and she could translate that into music. And so she was actually able to compose music that the orchestra she used to play with was able to perform. And it serves the desires of the materialist that says mankind is getting better and better. Through technology, we can improve our lives. We don't need God to do this. He said, technology is kind of a double-edged sword. For every problem it solves, it can create another one. Ultimately, perhaps those who he used the term techno-faith, are hoping maybe we can achieve immortality, perhaps by transferring our consciousness into a machine and live forever. That's kind of the ultimate goal. So what it demonstrates, though, is a desire in each of our hearts to connect with the transcendent, the fact that we have a desire to live forever. But it's kind of barking up the wrong tree through transhumanism. Paul Copan. Many of you may be familiar with that name already. He's written books like Is God a Moral Monster? Or Did God Really Command Genocide? So his area of specialty, one of them has been looking at some of the Old Testament scriptures that a lot of atheists like to toss back. God is a nasty, evil person for all of these atrocities that he's performed. Without getting into all of that, there are very good answers to that. But what he was talking about was relativism. One of the topics that we have talked about at length here as well. He covered some of the same kinds of examples that we have in terms of relativism being self-refuting. Well, you're wrong to judge me. Oh, wait. He said, imagine a situation. Imagine a situation where you are walking down a street on a dark night and you're being accosted by somebody. And there's a bystander who you're looking for help. Well, would the victim want the bystander to impose his own morality on the attacker? Relativism is easy until it applies to you. Then all of a sudden the rules are a little bit different. But he talked about an approach to sharing with folks in 5 different thresholds to bring them to faith. He said the first threshold is the move from distrust to trust. When we share, we can't make it look like they're a project. They're not going to trust us. You may have heard it said, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. You have to get across the point, I'm on your side, I'm in your corner. So once they trust, then the move from complacency to curiosity. What does all this matter? I'm going to die someday. I'm just going to turn to dust. So what? It's important to drive home the importance. No, this is an eternal issue. The stakes are high, and we have to communicate that. And the move from resistance to openness to change in their lives, to say, maybe there is something that I need to look inside about, because I'm not that wonderful a person. I need to make some changes, and to get them to kind of look inward through the gospel to motivate that. The move from meandering to intentionally seeking. Say, I'll just kind of go along my way, and if something strikes my fancy, then I'll take a look at it. Say, no, you gotta be intentional. You gotta weigh things out and really take a close look at things. And finally, the move into the kingdom of God itself, to help them kind of cross that threshold, maybe a challenge. Well, what's stopping you? So he just talked about those stages of sharing with people to help to bring them to the gospel. Caleb Kaltenbach was an interesting topic. He's a pastor and author of Messy Grace, How a Pastor with Gay Parents Learned to Love Others Without Sacrificing Conviction. So Caleb's story his parents divorced when he was young, and both parents then became involved in same-sex relationships. So he grew up with his mother and her partner, and without going into the story of his conversion, and eventually became a pastor, there was a same-sex couple who came to his church and said, "What does your church teach about homosexuality?" He said, "Before I answer, tell you what, let's make an appointment and sit down and tell me your story." And they told about the hurt, about the hatefulness that they'd received. And he said, "Yeah, I can totally understand why you wouldn't want any part of people like that." And so he listened to their story before saying, our belief is that the practice of homosexuality is wrong, but that is no excuse to treat someone with anything other than love and respect. So what he said is the theological conviction is never justification to mistreat another person. So we have these opposing forces, opposing concepts, grace versus truth, mercy versus rules. On one side of our culture, it says tolerate everything. Then you find the other side, like Hillsborough Baptist, that says, no, you've got to follow the rules. If not, you're damned to hell. Well, he kind of likened it to having a rubber band. If you just hold it on one side, here's the grace side of it. Yeah, anything's fine. There's no power in that. No, this is the truth. These are the rules. These are the laws. There's no power in that. Where the power comes in is the tension between the two. One God, three persons. Jesus is fully God, fully man. Our Bible is inspired by God, but penned by human beings. The power exists in the tension between these things that appear to be opposites. So his advice is to be known what you're for, not what you're against. So think deeper about the person, not differently about the theology. Embrace the difference between acceptance and approval. Finally, stop trying to fix people. Just point them to Jesus. It's not our job to straighten anybody out. Just point them to the gospel as they are and let the Holy Spirit work in their hearts. Gary, I've got a couple more. Don't know if should I save that for another time or wind it up? Yeah, I can do that. So, got a couple more. I can, if anyone wants afterward, I can fill you in on the other few. So, but anyway, it's, I thought, a very worthwhile event. They're doing it every year about this time. So next time it rolls around, we'll let you know that it's coming up and would encourage you to attend.
Thank you, Tracy. Next week, we're probably going to hear from Steve or Nathan because they're doing a talk over at Cal State San Marcos. They're part of the audience, but they're going to listen to Scott Klusendorf, who's probably the premier pro-life apologist. A lot of ones that want abortion don't want to debate him. He's just a grinder. He just tears them apart. But so he's just doing a talk. It's not a debate. But so I hope you can come next week and hear what happened during that. Okay, so we'll pick up a couple of people another time here. So I sent you out a note, and I said I wasn't going to do an outline. You'll see why, because it would have been a giveaway, and it's something I wanted you to think about a little bit along the way here. So I just call this a different kind of apologetics. And this is the one that we're used to doing, isn't it? We examine the Christian faith. We look for evidence. We talk about Christianity as an evidence-based religion. And so we have all these factual reasons that we can lay on people, or we can go research them if we don't know things about why we believe there's a God, why we think miracles really occur. And we've covered a lot of these during our classes. If for some reason this is your first session through with us, if you go to the EFCC website and you go to the top right and it says resources, and you pull down the menu and it says apologetics, and you go there, we must have 55 or 60 different audio lectures that are saved for you there. You just download them, take them with you. And so we covered these things in case you said, geez, I wish we were doing some of these. Well, they're there. And we've got video, different recordings as well. Why we trust the Gospels. A lot of good reasons, manuscript evidence. And by the way, did you hear they're starting to talk now that it's been undercover for a long, long time that they apparently have found a piece of Mark going back to the 1st century? So it's probably the oldest at this point, the oldest piece of a gospel. Not the whole gospel, but a portion of it. The winner so far had been John, about 120 AD, about the size of a credit card. And I don't know how big this piece is, but the story's coming out now that we're now putting the New Testament back into the 1st century. We're going that far back and finding pieces of it. So who knows? There's still things out there that can be found. So Indiana Jones is not dead. This stuff is out there. So we've got reasons. We could go into that, and we do. And why we believe in the historical Jesus. Evidence outside of the New Testament. It's available. Why we believe in the resurrection. Why Jesus is unique among all religious leaders. You just put Jesus up factually against other religious leaders, and you just watch them all fade away because there's nobody in comparison to Jesus. So we could do this. I mean, that's what we think of when we think of apologetics. But I want to do a different approach tonight, and I took this from a book, and I'll share it with you a little bit later. But it involves a process that we all follow. So let's say my teeth just don't feel really as clean anymore. I brush them, but so we start off. We have a need. That's a pretty simple one. But we have this need. So we start saying, okay, because I got the need, I'm going to start examining different objects that may help me out. And this is oral B. As it says on here, your dental professional believes in oral B and has made this investment in your oral health. On the front, it says, #1 recommended brand by dentists worldwide. So I start investigating. I go, well, I don't know. I'll give it a shot. Take it home and decide if it really met the need. See if the teeth feel any better. So that's a real simple example. We start with a need. Something inside us says, this isn't right. I need to change something. I got to get something. Something's not working right. I want something. And so I look at the thing and decide, yeah, or, oh, come on, this thing wasn't any better than what I had. All the bristles fell out in 3 weeks. So, but the decision is made after the need is felt, and then you act on it. Let me share with you before we look at Christianity, because I think Christianity is the best thing as far as meeting needs of people. Let me show you just a couple of quick stories here of not meeting the need. I'll start with this Christian Science one. I think I've read it in the past to you, but it's a guy whose grandmother is a Christian Scientist, and she's been in the faith for a long, long time. And she became very, very ill and ended up in the hospital. My grandfather and I sat at her bedside for 2 days while she died. Grandma Marie regained consciousness on several occasions during those 2 days. During these times, I spoke to her, looked into her eyes, and sought some comfort or source of strength to deal with her death. But all I saw was death and despair. She was dying, she was scared, she didn't know what was going to happen to her, and I had no idea what to say to comfort her. I'd never experienced such hopelessness as I experienced in that hospital room. My grandmother expressed to me her fear of death. She sought desperately to cling to life, but I didn't know anything I could say. Our local Christian Science church, you'd think they would come along, right? They offered no comfort whatsoever. In fact, not one person from the church visited us in the hospital. They told me later they didn't want their thoughts to interfere with her healing.
But I recognize this is just another sign of the reluctance of church members to face the reality of death. My grandfather sat in the hospital room with me and quoted from Mrs. Eddy, claiming my grandmother wasn't really seriously ill and that she'd get up and walk out of the hospital any minute. His heart, however, was not in it. Nobody could listen to my grandmother's increasingly labored breathing and not recognize that she would soon be dead. So do you see, she had the need. And she's turned to Christian Science. That's when you need it, when you're really facing a crisis. And she was facing that crisis moment. And nobody else in the church could even come to offer her consolation, or to hold her hand, or to be there for her, to pray for her, to give her a hug, to tell her goodbye, tell her what she meant to them. They abandoned her. So the church abandoned her, her faith abandoned her, all of this stuff just disappeared. Mrs. Eddy, no help at all. This is a long story, and I won't read the whole thing. I'll be glad to send it to you if you want. But it's the story of a woman who is involved really heavily in the New Age movement. I mean, she was seriously involved. She was introduced to a spiritual master, and it was a spirit being, looked wise and kind, so she got all involved in that. She learned to meditate. She did psychic healings. She chanted. She did Eastern meditation. She said, I felt like I was fading away and emerging with something greater. You know, that's the whole point. You kind of lose yourself. That's the whole point of that. Her psychic experiences escalated. She taught astrology. She wrote for astrological and New Age journals. So she's getting to be a pretty big, heavy hitter in the field. And then she says, though I believed, it says, yet with all the knowledge and experience I had acquired, what were the answers? Since I'd come to believe that there's only ignorance, not evil, stories of vicious cruelty and murder made me uncomfortable. So in that universe, if you believe in New Age, there's no evil. And then she encounters the evil. She reads about it. It's in the newspapers every day. And it's like there's dissonance going on there. So I don't think there's evil. Yes, there is. No, there isn't. So she's got this clash going on. I sought peace in Zen Buddhism. And she said it was appealing. It says, though detachment sounded good in all the books, there was a price to pay. The detachment seemed contrived and unnatural. Seeing the emptiness behind my surroundings, another sign of spiritual acumen, struck me as nihilistic and depressing. Maybe if I had pursued these practices more devoutly, I might have gradually replaced my natural reactions and feelings with non-feeling, because that's the whole point of this. Get rid of your feelings. Stop feeling. Stop being an individual, basically. And she says, but is it human to be non-feeling and to accept every thought, action, emotion without judgment? We're just drops in the ocean, I learned, and the goal is to eventually rejoin the cosmic oneness, as some call God. She says, well, where would I be? You disappear. Where would I be? The disturbing answer is I'd no longer be. Death became an absorbing but uneasy topic for me. So I won't, it's a long story, but I mean, you see the same thing. She's seeking answers. She's got that need. She wants to know what's ahead for me and what happens to me when I die, and can I get rid of all this despair that I have in my life? And she finally has given up on this and become a Christian. So all these other faiths have stories like this, don't they? We know Alan came from a Christian Science background. I'm sorry, Jehovah's Witness background. So we've got all these various groups that have people leaving the faith. Mormonism, same thing. They've gone there with a need, and it hasn't been met. And so what I want to do tonight is talk about the needs that Christianity can offer. So I ask you to think about this over the past week, and I've structured tonight around 9 different needs that we all have. So I'm just curious, what would be some needs that you can think of that people have down deep? Now, I'm not talking about food, drink and things like that, but I mean, just the bigger things we want as we go through life, right? Meaning. Do you really want to say I'm a cipher? I don't amount to anything. I'm just an accident? What else? Any other ones, Trace? Longing. Belonging. Yeah, belonging. Do you really want to go through life as a hyper-individual where there's nobody there as part of your connection? I'm going to mention that in a minute, but America today pushes really hard the idea of be all you can be, and you don't really need anybody else, and go out in the world and make it. And we were talking about today in one of my classes at school. I said, that's fine. Some people will make it on their own, but I said, some people are going to crash and burn. They won't have that support system out there. So belonging and being a part of something. Anything else you can think of that would be a need? What's that? Peace. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe an answer to the rat race. People get caught up in a rat race, and they just hope there's more to life
Yeah. Yeah. Nose to the grindstone, just kind of being the hamster on that wheel. Purpose. Yeah. Acceptance. Yeah. Yeah, because unfortunately we know ourselves really well. We probably don't deserve acceptance because we all are too familiar with what we've done. Keith? To love and be loved. So these are really important needs, and I'm only going to cover some of them tonight, and you brought up some others that I'm not covering, but it doesn't mean they're not important. It's just a matter of time. So what we're talking about is, what does Christianity offer so that people might at least be brought to the point of saying, you know, that sounds really good. Would you agree, by the way, Christianity is being sold in a real negative way today to the society? Yeah, it's for people that don't think. It's for people that are harsh. It's for arrogant people. I mean, we hear all these things. None of those things are true. So we probably need to wipe that slate clean and start all over and say, no. Christianity has many, many positive things to offer that would be really good for you to examine, then take that next step, like you do the toothbrush, take that next step and decide if it's true or not. So we're not going to argue tonight or talk about how you get somebody to believe it's true. That's the next step. The first step, I think, is going to be tonight is just saying this is appealing. These are things that we all have down deep, some needs that we have. So it's not going to be intellectual arguments. How does Christianity meet our most important needs? So how about number one? It offers us a meaning that suffering and life's problems and vicissitudes can't take away. So we already talked about this. People want to have something significant about their lives, don't they? Don't we all? Not to be a cipher, something significant? Well, people will say, yeah, but you can have meaning without God. I'm going to write the great American novel. Somebody else is going to start a printing business. Somebody else is going to become the CEO of a company. Well, yeah, so that's meaning, isn't it? I mean, that is a meaning. But I put a but up there. What do you think the but stands for? Can you have meaning without God? Yeah, but... But then you die. But maybe you don't last in that CEO position. Maybe that printing business that you start fails. I mean, what's to prevent these things that you say, I'm going to hang meaning on that? Can't those things go away? If Christianity is true, then it's a meaning that can't be taken away from you. You're part of something bigger than you. Isn't that part of meaning? That you're part of something bigger? But here's my example. I know you can't see it very well here, but has anybody ever gone up to Bodie? Yeah? Okay, it's up near Mammoth, but instead of hanging west, you go east and you bump along. Sharon and I first went there, and it was just a dirt road, and they finally paved the thing. But it's an old, it was a silver mining place. And then the state of California, instead of letting the whole thing get burned down or a bunch of vagrants go in there and ruin it all, they preserved it. And there's a ranger or somebody that keeps it there. And so you can walk through it. And we happened to be there late afternoon. There's only one other family there, and they were off somewhere else. So we're walking down these streets, totally deserted. It's like a bad Twilight Zone episode. And you could see like curtains flapping. You kind of turn around. And it was so quiet because you're out in the middle of nowhere. You don't see lights. You don't see anything. And so we poked our heads in. You couldn't walk in. But this is the church in Bodie. And thinking about being part of something bigger, Sharon and I looked at each other and we said, we would have fit right in. We would have been very comfortable there. We could have walked in 100 years ago and sat down with those people and shared something bigger than us. There are people that are worshiping the same God. They have a little, you can't see it from where you are, but there's a phrase up there, and it's from Psalm 65, and it says, praise waiteth for thee, O God, in Zion. So they're reading the Bible. And I know it's kind of a simple thought, but I just felt a connection with those people. So hundreds of years, we're part of something pretty big, aren't we? I thought that was pretty neat. How about this? Somebody, I think, brought this up, a sense of belonging. What do we get today? I just mentioned this a while back. People are not connecting as much as they used to. We don't know our neighbors in many cases. Sharon and I are fortunate. We've been with the same neighbors for a long, long time. But most of us don't know neighbors. We don't get to know people very well at work. Just this week, somebody asked me out of Palomar, they said, hey, whatever happened to so-and-so, one of the adjuncts, one of the part-time teachers? And I said, I don't know. I just said, have you spent time with him? I said, no, I just see him up and down the hallway and say hi. And apparently he's had a stroke, and, so he wasn't coming to class all of a sudden, but nobody could reach him. And I thought, well, that's bad on me because I didn't know him that well to be able to worry about him and know what's going on. But, we're often that way. We don't have the social clubs as much as they used to have. Yeah, there's still Kiwanis and there's still things like that. But, they used to have Elks and all these different organizations that you could join. Boy Scouts, I doubt that their numbers are up like they used to be. And so there aren't those kinds of joining things anymore. You just kind of pushed out of the nest and say, make it in this world. You're on your own, kid. But what does Christianity say? Is this good news or is this good news? We're part of a huge family. We do belong. In fact, Jesus says you can talk to God like you talk to your dad. You say, Daddy. You called him Abba. That's not just formal, hello, sir, he's our daddy. You can crawl up in his lap. And we have brothers and sisters in the faith. Is that nice or what? You can go to any town and find a church there, and you got brothers and sisters. You're part of a huge family. Christianity is really the world's largest multi-ethnic community. I'm going to share a song with you in just a minute. You think about something like Islam. Okay, people that are following Islam are going to say, you really need to read the Quran in what? Arabic. Everything else is just kind of an opinion. And so the idea is if you can't read it in Arabic, you're kind of second rate. You're not really part of the family. Yeah, you can go through the motions and stuff, but if you want to be in, you got to be Arab. So but Christianity doesn't say that. It's all over the world. Now, we're here in America, and we feel like things are kind of dying, but it's booming in South America. It's booming in Africa. What's South Korea up to, 50, 60% Christian now? It's booming in China. Best thing that happened was the communists took over and kicked the missionaries out and said, well, there goes Christianity. No, God had better plans than that. So it's booming all over the world. It's a huge multi-ethnic organization. So I wanted to share a song with you real quickly. I'll put the lyrics up here. It's by a group called Newsboys, which I know dates me. Okay, but this is the song. I don't know. That just gives me chills the way they talk about the big cathedrals. So people that have the money can, splash it out there. But then you got people worshiping underground. And we know a family that live in Turkey. And so they're kind of on the edge there because it's a little dangerous territory. But he's got a church there in Smyrna. And you think about Smyrna, that's in the New Testament. So 2,000 years that church has been there. Not his church, but I'm just saying there are believers still there, even in the most bleak countries. And I love reading about things like that, what the missionaries are up to, and just all over the world, people are singing to the same God. I mean, talk about multi-ethnic. I thought that was beautiful. Here's a third thing that I think Christianity offers. And again, we're not saying it's true, but just people could at least see what it offers and walk in and find out. And then we could talk to them about the evidence that's there for it. But the reality of morality and justice. Think about this. Can you have moral goodness? In other words, can people do good things without a God? Yeah. People can walk old ladies across the street. People can give to United Way. So that's not the issue. Can people act morally? No, that's not a problem. We all say yeah. Can an atheist be moral? Yeah. Atheists do wonderful things. Here's the catch. Can you say to somebody else, this is what you ought to do? In other words, can you put an obligation on somebody? What do you think? You can't. Because they're going to say to you, says who? It's because you tell me that it's something I ought to do. I don't feel like doing it. Who are you? So you say, well, I'm part of the police force or something. Okay, well, just because you got a gun, And you can throw me in jail? Really? That's the reason? Morality comes out of the edge of a gun? You say, well, the state of California has deemed it to be okay or moral. Really? The state of California? I wouldn't use that as a real big authority figure. So move it to the Washington, D.C. The United States Congress passes something. Says who? So what? Has the Congress ever been wrong? Let's see. Have they ever been right? So the United Nations meets. Let's take it up another notch. So the United Nations declares this to be okay. Really? I mean, you can see the problem. Where are you going to establish that morality? Where's it going to be established? Somewhere on Earth? No, it doesn't work that way. There's a man named Leff who was a professor at Duke, and he's not a Christian, and he wrote a whole paper that ends up with this says who question, because he says we're stuck. Whatever you think of as a morality generator, if it's not outside the human race, the people inside the human race are going to say, who are you? What gives you the right? But what does Christianity do? It says there is a morality and it's out beyond us. How about number 4, identity and self-worth? We talked about that, I think, a few minutes ago. In our society, how do you get an identity? You work. So have you noticed when you meet somebody, you say, so what do you do for a living? You don't really care. You're just trying to figure out where to put them on the pecking order. I had a really good friend, and he was a plumber. And he said the minute he told, and this guy was so sharp, he'd read Russian novels I could never figure out. And a really, really sharp guy. He graduated from college. It was just his dad had done some plumbing, and that's where, the money came. So he was a plumber. But he said the minute people would ask him, so what do you do for a living? He'd say, I'm a plumber. The eyes went blank, and they wanted to go talk to somebody else. Because they'd kind of put him in a pigeonhole. Oh, you belong down here. Okay, so a lot of people, and I think this is true, we often get an identity. It comes from work, and if we retire, then some people are really lost, because they want the identity. Yeah, and your identity often depends on your performance, doesn't it? You better keep coming through. That's why in this society, people that have Down syndrome or something like that, if they're not performing, maybe they're not worth as much. That's what we're starting to hear, isn't it? Let's abort them. Let's get them out of there. They're hurting the rest of us. And then there's a lot of comparison that goes on. How are you doing compared to somebody else? What's Christianity? Is it based on performance? Thank goodness, no. Christianity says it's not your performance that counts. How about another one, number 5? Yeah, go ahead.
So on self-worth or worthiness in general, as of late, our society, the pro-choice community says you're not really a person until you're born. The evolutionists will kind of conflate a microevolutionary concept into, why, yes, we all came from a single cell billions of years ago. You're nothing more than a biological accident.
Yeah.
Where's that sense of worth gone in our society over the last generation or two? It's just taken a nosedive, and I think we're reaping the consequences.
Sure, if kids are told over and over again you're a biological fluke, then what are they living for? Where's their self-worth? You're an accident. How about number 5, a hope that changes everything? Think about this. What is hope? Hope is 2 things, isn't it really? It's a desire that you have, so maybe you want to... Yeah. The desire is there, and there's an expectation that it's going to pay off. So here's an example. You got 2 people, and they're working in a factory someplace, and a boss comes up to one of them and says, work for 6 months and I'll give you $5,000. And the boss goes up to somebody else for some reason and says to this other person, you work for 6 months and I'll give you $50,000. That one person is going to be working and kind of bored with it, and because there's not a huge payoff, there's not much expectation out there. The other person is really happy because there's a lot of hope going on there, thinking, hey, this is going to pay off for me. Our society, though, says what? What's the big payoff? In the ground. Maybe you get 80 years, good for you, and then you're gone. And you just hope that you get a nice casket and people do a nice ceremony, and then that's it. That's it. That's the end of everything. You ever seen those bumper stickers? He who has the most toys wins. That's it? That's life? That's your hope? And you notice all these hopes and desires that we have, even the people that get to them, whatever they are, they often don't satisfy. Because they're such low expectations. It's the money, or it's the position, or it's the woman, or it's the, whatever. And then you get it, and you go, that's it? There's an old Peggy Lee song. What's it called? Is that all there is? Okay, some of you guys recognize it. That's the most bleak, secular song that's ever been written, because she's trying all these things, and over again, it's like, is that it? That's life? That's everything I was hoping for? Doesn't mean anything. So what do we get? We get a society that they say, okay, well, maybe that wasn't it. So they get a new it, and they go after it, chase it, and they get it, and they go, well, that wasn't it. And then it's something else. People like that? They kind of are going from one thing to the next, trying to get the big hit that's going to make life good. Or they get angry because they didn't get it. So they get bitter. And they kind of tune out. They get angry about everything. Or how about they change things in their lives? They say, you're a drag. You're not helping me get there. So we get a 50% divorce rate. Well, you're not it, so I'll dump you. I'll find somebody else. Or they detach from the world and just say, okay, I guess there's nothing in this world. And they're totally disconnected. But Christianity, think about all the good things that come about because of Christianity as far as hope. Resurrection. The grave's not the end. The world's going to be healed. Our souls and our bodies are going to be saved. These are the big, big things that people worry to death about, don't they? I hate to say it, but I like Woody Allen's films and his books and all. I know, his personal life is a mess. But book after book of his and movie after movie of his is him worrying about these things. He says, I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there when it happens. He is worried about death. He brings death into so many of his stories. Okay, well, we don't have to worry about that. That's not the end. How about number 6? Something else that we gain from Christianity that we don't get other places, a sense of awe, a sense of inspiration. Science has kind of taken some of that joy away from us. We used to look at sunsets and say, isn't that beautiful? Now they tell you it's just a refraction of light. Oh, you listen to a beautiful song and they tell you it's just sound waves. They keep reducing all these wonderful things of life to just stuff. You can measure it. And it's like, but isn't there something else more enjoyable in life? How does Christianity create awe and inspiration? Let me just give you a few ideas, and there are probably plenty more, but there's design in this universe. There's design in the human body. Isn't that amazing? And they keep finding out more and more, because I know Tracy will buy into this from what they do with Stand to Reason and Reasons to Believe. They keep saying there's more and more evidence for design. 30, 40 years ago, there are a few things, but now they keep discovering the way the Earth is. They used to say the Earth is just a little podunk planet out in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't really count. It's on the outskirts of everything, absolutely non-entity there. And now they're discovering everything about the Earth is special. Everything about the sun is special. Everything about the other planets, you have to have those there. You have to be in the right kind of galaxy. And the expansion rate of the universe has to be just exact. If it expands faster, you don't get planets. Everything's just material. Just stuff goes apart. If it expands too slowly, you just get gunk. Just all one big pile of stuff, and it doesn't get to separate into the planets and into the stars and stuff like that. So you got design. That is an amazing thing. Just keep an eye out for the new things they'll be coming up with. They're going to come up more and more design features of this universe. How about this? We have a God of love. Isn't that a wild concept when you really think about it? The God that created the universe loves us? We take that for granted, I guess, but that's pretty amazing. He seems like he'd have many more important things to do than care about us. And then, how about this? We have the only God that stepped into the world and has wounds. What other God has wounds? What other God has come in and been part of our life? How about the Bible as a holy book? Steve's talked about this before, but can you think of some ways that the Bible is an amazing book?
Written by 40 authors over periods of hundreds or more than 1,000 years, and yet it all tells a single coherent message.
Yeah, try to get 40 people together, even in the same time period, and get them to tell the same story. That's an impossibility, but they did it over centuries. They did it in different areas, 3 continents, I think, and it's a coherent story. How about the prophecy? Isn't that amazing, some of those things? Psalm 22, my, why have you forsaken me? You read Psalm 22, Jesus quotes it on the cross, and what he's undergoing is exactly what David talked about. How does that happen? Things about Sidon and Tyre that Ezekiel talked about. Hundreds of years later, here came Alexander the Great, and he did exactly to those cities that Ezekiel had talked about. I mean, just on and on and on. Daniel's prophecy of the weeks that seemed to have been fulfilled exactly when Jesus came along. In fact, the Jews at that time were looking for a Messiah based on Daniel. Later on, some of the Jewish rabbis said, let's not read Daniel anymore to the congregation because we missed it. Yeah, some of them did. Recognition of a soul. Christianity, that's an amazing thing, isn't it? What does the scientific world want to do now? It wants to reduce us just to mechanics. We're just chemicals. But we say, no, we have a soul. Christianity talks about the soul. And if we have a soul, we have free will. We don't have free will if we don't have a soul, do we? I mean, how do chemicals have free will? No, hydrogen does what hydrogen does. Carbon does what carbon does. But we have free will. I mean, that's a pretty amazing thing. I think that's neat. We're part of, when we mentioned this already, but we're part of something much bigger than just our individual lives. There's a sense of wonder and awe. Have you ever thought about how much beautiful composition work in the area of the arts has come about because of Christianity? Michelangelo, Handel. What did Handel do? He did the whole thing in under a month, didn't he? 3 weeks. And he said he had tears in his eyes. He said, I saw heaven opened up before me. I mean, just it's amazing thing that he accomplished. Bach used to sign all of his works to the glory of God. So some of the best that you can wrap yourself in or look at and listen to and all that kind of stuff often came because of this awe and inspiration that people felt about the existence of a God. Isn't this a big one? We have a society today that tries to get rid of guilt by pills and therapists, both pretty expensive. And frankly, many of them long-term, like the rest of your life. If they work, it seems like it'd work faster than that. But for a lot of people, it's like, constant therapy the rest of their lives. Because they're feeling guilt. Well, yeah, we all feel guilt. You know why? We're guilty. It's not all that complicated. We can't even live up to our own standards. Forget the 10. I like the people who say, well, I try to live up to the 10 commandments. Yeah, right. But I mean, don't even worry about those standards. What about your own standards? Do we break our own standards? Yeah, all the time. We know us, unfortunately, and we don't match up very well with what we say we ought to do. So Christianity says, don't get into therapy. Go for forgiveness. There is forgiveness out there. I was raised in the church, so I don't have any stories to tell, but I do know some people who have been out in the world and done some pretty horrific things and have come to Christ, and they know the reality of this, that the guilt that is gone. They may have some memories, but the guilt is not on their shoulders night and day. So I don't have a story, but other people do. How about number 8, respectful treatment of other people? I mean, just think about the hostility that's out there in the world today. Isn't it sad? You've got racism and sexism and all these things going on. We treat each other so badly. But what about Christianity? What do we say? Well, it's not based on works. If it's based on works, we could feel superior, couldn't we, to other people? Hey, I've been doing the 5 pillars of Islam, and you haven't. You're not up to my standards. Hey, I've gotten pretty far in Buddhism, and you haven't. Yeah, that's because I've been working at it. What's wrong with you? Christianity says it's not works. You're not going to get to heaven on your own works. So where's the pride? We don't need the pride. And others, frankly, may be better people than we are. We're saved by grace, not because we're better people. And I talked to Dan about this one, about we're all beggars just telling others where the food is. We're not supplying the banquet. And we are, one more time, a multicultural religion. So there's no need for us to feel superior. In Christianity, we wouldn't feel superior. Somebody in India, somebody in Taiwan, wherever they are, they're brothers and sisters in Christ. They're no worse, they're no better than we are. And we're all created in the image of God. So it puts us on equal footing with everybody. that verse that we talk about at the beginning of Apologetics from 1 Peter says you got to do it with grace when you're talking to other people because they're in the image of God. We're not better. And then I'll end on this one, the idea of gaining security. And do you ever hear this? Oh, Christianity is just a crutch. That's pretty common. So I guess the question might be, okay, but everybody's got crutches in their life. Everybody does. You depend and we depend. Everybody depends on something to get through life. And so I think it's fair to turn around and ask people, okay, so what's your crutch? Money? Does that ever leave people? Does that crutch ever give way? Oh, yeah. Yeah, people, depend on so much money for whatever, and then the job changes or the job disappears or whatever. And that nest egg they thought was going to be a nest egg, they're going through it fast because they lost the job. So where's that satisfaction of money being their crutch? About a person? Yeah, do people always stay around? Do people always, are they always going to be there for you? No. Jobs? No, not in this society. Things are coming and going pretty fast. Prestige. Your name on a building, your name on a whatever. Well, some people have had prestige and it's gone away. Lance Armstrong comes to mind. Okay, but I mean, that's obvious sin issue. But I mean, there are other people that have had that prestige and it's disappeared on them. Education. Hey, I'm out there at Palomar, but, and I tell my students, say, generally an education will get you someplace, but I also say you ought to figure out what kind of job prospects are out there based on what you want to do. They can do these liberal arts, and that doesn't get them anything. I hate to say it, but, those are degrees that just say, I stuck it out for 4 years. They don't really have a specific area they know anything about. So you got to be kind of careful. Education isn't always the payoff. I bet you, I've talked to students out there, they know others who have been to school, they got their degree, and they're working at some other job completely unrelated to what they wanted, and not even at that level they were hoping for. It's down here somewhere. And you probably know stories like that too. So I don't say that to discourage students, but I just say, you got to focus on where you want to go with things here. So conclusion, there are good intellectual reasons. I just didn't want to do that tonight. I wanted to think about this, that the deepest yearnings that people have, out of all the religions, out of all the self-help stuff, out of all the books that are out there to make yourself successful in life, Christianity meets the deepest ones, and these are the ones that we just talked about. And at the very bottom. So let me tell you where I picked up a lot of this. I just thought it was really, really powerful. Tim Keller is he's on my top of the list of apologists and pastors and all this kind of stuff. He's a pastor back east. He's put out several books. The first one is called The Reason for God. And Newsweek called him a C.S. Lewis for the 21st century. Hey, that's pretty good if he's in the league with C.S. Lewis. So this book of his is a really good one to give to people who are not Christians because it talks about these things with more detail, obviously, and he brings in other things I didn't have time for tonight. But he says, you ought to at least investigate Christianity because it offers these things. Now, this is not the argument for the truth of it. You'd have to go to other sources, but at least getting people curious to know, man, those are good things. I'd love to have those in my life. And so he says, at least investigate Christianity. Be open to it. So I would recommend this book highly. Some of you know Tim Keller. You've read some of his other works. Yeah. Okay, so that's the presentation of the evening, and so I've kind of shortchanged this on Q&A. I asked Tracy if he wanted to help. Oh, I've got to turn this off, right? Yeah, I always forget.
Actually, if I could toss something in there.
Sure.
That kind of covered the last speaker, because he addressed that. Cameron McAllister talked about the glamour of atheism. And
Tracy, you want to?
Thanks. Yeah, and that there really is, we don't want to discount the pull of other beliefs. There's a reason that they believe what they do. It may not be true. It may be something that they simply like. And he used the term social imaginary. It's the kinds of experiences you have that say, this is just what makes sense to me. This is what feels good.
And the approach that he talked about, an atheistic worldview does have an appeal as a romantic one. We are getting better and better as a society as time goes by. But the problem is, as you look at our movies, our TV, our news, you can see we're not getting any better. And he said the approach to take, two questions we can ask. First is, what do you think? The second one is, what do you want? What is your deepest heart's desire? To kind of feed into this and say, get past the doubt. Oh, I don't believe this. I don't believe that. Okay, that's fine. What do you believe? Even when they'll say, well, I'm not going to bear the burden of proof and say, I don't think God exists. I just believe one less God than you do. Like, well, what do you believe? And from there, ask, now look at reality. From what you believe, does it look like it's borne out by reality? Does reality line up with what your deepest beliefs are? Or is there a disconnect there? It may be a good jumping off point to talk to someone of different beliefs, is to kind of get into this whole topic of, what do you want? What does the perfect world look like to you? And does this look like it?
Anybody have any questions here? We've got about 5 minutes.
So I have a question. There's something that's been weighing heavy on my mind since. Since actually, maybe you can read it. We were talking about the Jehovah's Witnesses, and at the end of when Steve talked, I forget if someone asked him or if he offered up that in all these years of dealing with him, he had not ever, in fact, seen a convert, which prompted this. So could you read that? So it's Matthew 10:14.
And whosoever shall not receive you, nor hear your words, when you depart out of that house or city, shake off the dust of your feet.
So what about that? I mean, what about, so in apologetics, I get that the goal is to, I guess to some degree, the pebble of the shoe or plant the seed or whatever it is. But when do you shake the dust off your feet?
There's a friend of mine that got some good advice from a missionary who said the way they work is to observe where the Holy Spirit is working and follow the lead of the Spirit and just test the waters. Is someone open to discussing ideas, or are they just hard shut down? No, you can't change my mind. I think this is all a bunch of nonsense and you're deluded and so forth. And if someone has that kind of an attitude where they're not willing to listen, it seems like the Holy Spirit is not working there at this time. And so in that situation, say, okay, well, Lord be with you. And, you may deal with them professionally, in which case, if you encounter them on a day-to-day basis, you can be nice and polite and professional and let your witness work in that regard, and you don't have to push it. But if someone is showing an open heart, someone wanting to investigate, all right, that's where we're going to be spending our time to answer the questions and to come alongside. And I think where to draw that dividing line is how receptive they are to discussing things of the Spirit. If they're not willing to discuss it, then okay. You don't necessarily have to write them off permanently, but just say, okay, today's not the day.
You don't have to win the battle. You just have to plant the seed.
Yeah, exactly.
Our job is to be faithful. God's going to take care of it. So whether it's now or whether it's later. Greg Kokel has said, it's like sheep grazing, and if they lift their heads, he invests the time at that point. I mean, you can tell really quickly, can't you, if somebody is just tuning you out and just going, and versus the one that makes the eye contact and asks good questions and things like that. Oh.
Leading by example.
Oh yeah.
I try and do that with some of my neighbors. It hasn't caught on, and I haven't given up. And I'm a salesman, and I don't give up. I just keep on keeping on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Our time is never God's time. You know, it's like we want instant reactions, and sometimes it's a process.
As a military chaplain, there's advantages and disadvantages. The one advantage is they expect you to be a representative of God. So you're always there when they need to ask a question. But you can also put out the little feelers. But the disadvantage there is as soon as the door is closed, you don't pursue, you don't progress there until the next opportunity. So it's you have to be sensitive to where they're coming from. And once again, wait for the leading of the Holy Spirit.
I like to do it kind of like in fishing when you're throwing out chum and trying to see if you attract anything. Like today there's a kid sitting in the front, and he's really interested in business. And he had this book, and it's by Zig Ziglar. Okay. So I said, so what are you reading today about business? I said, hey, this guy is interesting. I said, I heard him at my church because he's a good Christian guy. And then I'm just going to leave it there. And we'll see. I don't know if he's going to react to that. But I like to throw little things out and just see what happens. Sometimes you don't get anything. Okay, no big deal. I don't see it as a setback. You know, it's just.
But if he ever has a question, he'll know to come to you.
Yeah, hope so. Yeah.
You know, I was just going to say that I do think it is important to throw those out there, like you're saying, because I'm just thoroughly convinced that nobody thinks about this stuff nowadays. You know, and people just go through their lives. Tim Keller.
Yeah.
I finished reading a book that he was talking about work, one of his books on work, and he was talking about the work behind the work. So everybody goes to work, but the work behind the work is trying to find meaning in who you are. So it's a rat race, right? You're trying to prove yourself to the other guy. That's the work under the work. I think that's what he said, the work under the work. And I think people just go through their lives doing that. No one's even thinking about this stuff sometimes, especially when you're younger. Maybe when you get older, you start realizing, hey, you know, I'm going to, you know, you get closer to dying and that sort of thing. Yeah. But I like what you said, Tracy, that what do you believe? That's a really easy one. You know, and you don't have to throw out that, you know, you can throw out that you're a Christian or whatever, like you were saying about Zig Ziglar and so on. But just asking somebody, what do you believe? I think it gets people thinking, because a lot of people don't hear those kind of questions anymore.
right. They not only they may have a pat answer in terms of, well, I believe this. When you dig down and say, well, why? They'll come up with all sorts of reasons. Well, because I don't believe that, or I don't like this, or this appeals to me. But the only good reason to believe something is because it's true. Nothing else is a good reason to believe something when we're talking about eternal stakes here. You know, my people might say, well, yeah, I was kind of born into it. I was raised in this environment, or this just resonates with me. That's not a good reason. Well, okay, yeah, you're on the same wavelength, but does that mean it's true? You know, that's what we need to get down to.
Hey, let's go ahead and close, and we'll stick around. And thank you all for coming. And next week it'll be Steve and Nathan, I hope, will come, and they'll share with us what happened at the meeting. Father, I thank you so much for this evening. Thank you for the people coming out tonight. And thank you that Christianity is not this grim faith that so many in the media and all try to portray today, but it offers some amazing things. And so if we can keep that in mind as we're talking to people, to share with them the joy of Christianity, the hope, the meaning, all these things that we were talking about tonight. And pray you bless the people as they're going about the rest of this week, and ask it in your Son's name. Amen. More snacks, I think.